Imagine this. You're standing in front of a mirror, the same one you've seen every day for years. But today, something feels different. The glass doesn't just reflect your face, it reflects a question you've been too afraid to ask out loud. Why do I feel ugly? It's not just about the curve of your nose or the way your jaw doesn't look like the filtered perfection you scroll past online. It's deeper, it's not even always visual. Sometimes it's a weight in your chest, an invisible sickness, a quiet shame, a voice constant, cynical, that whispers, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough." But here's the paradox. You've seen people who look like you, or even worse, by society's shallow standards, and they walk with the confidence of kings. You've met them. Their presence fills a room. So why do you shrink? Why does your reflection feel like a betrayal? Imagine being born into a system where the first thing stolen from you is your right to define your own worth. Imagine growing up surrounded by mirrors that don't reflect reality, but distortion, each one angled just slightly to convince you you're broken. You begin to believe that your appearance is a problem to fix, a threat to your acceptance, a limitation on your lovability. And yet, no matter how much you alter, enhance, filter, or conceal, it never quite goes away, does it? The feeling, the ache, the suspicion that you are fundamentally unattractive, not just in form, but in essence. Like something about you simply doesn't belong. Why do we tie beauty to value? Why do we fear being seen, really seen, without armor, without edits, without escape? What if this question, why do I feel ugly, wasn't just a personal insecurity, but a philosophical crisis, a cultural mirror, a psychological wound passed down like a virus, invisible but contagious? This isn't about beauty. This is about perception, identity, power, and the system that benefits when you doubt yourself. So hold on to that question. Let it burn a little. Don't run from it, because to answer it, you have to go deeper into the psyche, into history, into the very architecture of how you've been taught to see yourself. And it begins with what you were never told. You were never born feeling ugly. A newborn doesn't flinch from its reflection. A child doesn't critique its proportions or obsess over blemishes. Those thoughts aren't instincts. They're inherited scripts, planted in the soil of your psyche before you even knew what self-worth meant. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And terrifying it is, because to accept yourself, you must first confront the voices in your mind that do not belong to you. Where did they come from? The moment you first compared yourself to another. The first time someone laughed at your face, or worse, looked through it. The ad that showed you beauty was symmetrical, spotless, surgically precise. The quiet shift in your mother's tone when she looked in the mirror and sighed. The classmates who worshipped the popular girl not for her mind but her waist. You absorbed it all, not consciously, but osmotically, like secondhand smoke. Psychologists call it internalized objectification, the act of seeing yourself not as a subject, but as an object to be judged, consumed, evaluated. Your own eyes turned into surveillance cameras, your mind fractured into critic and prisoner. And society, it applauds this fracture. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of this mechanism when he spoke of slave morality, a system where values are inverted to serve the powerful. In this system, your self-hatred is profitable. The less you like yourself, the more obedient you become. You buy more, you strive more, you apologize for taking up space. Beauty then is not a truth, it's a currency. And ugly is simply the absence of wealth. Aldous Huxley envisioned this future in Brave New World, a society anesthetized by pleasure, controlled not by fear but by desire. In this world, beauty is the leash, and we chase it like starving dogs. And so the question isn't, why do I feel ugly? The real question is, who benefits from your self-loathing? This hidden architecture of perception runs deeper than psychology. It drills into philosophy, into existentialism, into the nature of self. Jean-Paul Sartre believed the gaze of the other could imprison us, that to be seen through the eyes of judgment is to be objectified. When you believe someone else holds the power to declare you beautiful or ugly, you've handed them the keys to your existence. And yet, the rebellion, the truth, is already stirring beneath the surface. Something in you knows this doesn't feel right. You sense the lie, even if you can't yet name it. But naming it is the next step, because this isn't just about your reflection, it's about your reality. And the cost of accepting someone else's version of who you are. What happens when you believe you're ugly, not just in passing, but deep in your bones? You begin to shrink, not physically, but existentially. You become small in conversations, you avert your gaze, you speak less, laugh less, ask for less. You step out of photos, you say no to opportunities, you apologize for being in the frame, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you feel like a wrong that exists. This is where the wound becomes a cage. You start to curate your life like a storefront, lighting yourself just right, posing at flattering angles, deleting images that reveal too much truth. But what begins as self-protection becomes self-erasure. Slowly, invisibly, you start to disappear, not just from photos, but from your own life. And the irony? The more you chase approval, the more approval eludes you. Cognitive psychology calls this the confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out information that confirms what you already believe. If you think you're unattractive, you'll interpret neutral expressions as judgment. You'll overlook compliments. You'll magnify insults. Your mind becomes a courtroom where the verdict was decided before the trial even began. Meanwhile, society, hungry, always hungry, feeds on this insecurity. Every time you feel inadequate, you become a consumer. You buy creams, you chase trends, you contour your face, not for art, but for worth. And the algorithms? They notice. They tailor your feed to show you more of what you lack. Airbrushed gods and goddesses whose existence was born in pixels and profit. You begin to live in comparison. And comparison, as the old saying goes, is the thief of joy. But it's worse than that. Comparison is the architect of alienation. You no longer see people, you see threats. Each face becomes a mirror of your failure. Each body, a reminder of what you are not. And so, you isolate. You withdraw from community, from vulnerability, from the messiness of real human connection. The tragedy is that ugliness, as you've been taught to experience it, has nothing to do with your face and everything to do with your disconnection. From yourself, from others, from truth. The neurologist Ian McGilchrist once wrote that the modern brain is split not just anatomically, but culturally. The left hemisphere, obsessed with order, control, and fragmentation, has come to dominate our worldview. In that world, beauty is a checklist, a measurement, a number. The soul, the ineffable, the wildness of human essence, forgotten. And so you suffer, not because you are ugly, but because you were taught to believe you could be. And you don't know yet that this belief can be broken. You are not the problem, but you are holding the key. It begins when you stop asking the mirror for permission, not in defiance, not in arrogance, but in awakening. You begin to realize that the mirror has never been neutral. It's been a gatekeeper, a liar dressed in glass. And worse, it speaks with a voice you mistook for your own. But it wasn't yours. It was a chorus of voices. Advertisers, childhood wounds, school bullies, edited influencers, patriarchal systems, all echoing in unison, all invested in one thing, your doubt. Because a person who doubts themselves is easier to manipulate, easier to market to, easier to control. But the rebellion? It doesn't start with smashing the mirror. It starts with seeing through it. Jean-Paul Sartre believed that freedom begins the moment you realize your identity is not fixed, that you are not condemned to be what others say you are. Existence precedes essence, he wrote. You are not born ugly or beautiful, you simply are. And what you become is a choice, albeit a terrifying, radical one. And that's the problem, isn't it? Freedom is frightening. If you're not ugly, if the judgment you've internalized isn't truth, then who are you? And what have you lost by believing in the lie? This is where the ground begins to shift. You stop viewing beauty as something to earn and begin seeing it as something to unlearn. You unlearn the belief that you are an object. You unlearn the need to perform. You unlearn the idea that your worth lives in someone else's eyes. This is where shadow work, as Carl Jung called it, becomes essential. You confront the hidden parts of yourself. The shame, the anger, the ache for approval. You stop banishing these feelings and instead sit with them. Listen to them. Ask them what they've come to teach you. Because beneath every feeling of ugliness is a deeper wound, one of rejection, abandonment, or fear. Not of the body, but of the soul. When you start to listen, you stop fighting yourself. You begin to integrate. You become whole again. Not flawless, not polished, but real. And reality, as strange as it sounds, is more beautiful than perfection. History is filled with those who broke this mold. Frida Kahlo, whose unibrow and scars became symbols of rebellion. James Baldwin, who challenged a racist and heteronormative world by claiming his voice and his body on his terms. Even Socrates, whom history deemed ugly, yet whose mind reshaped Western philosophy. What they all shared was this: they refused to outsource their worth. And you can too. The rebellion is not in becoming beautiful. It is in realizing that you always were, but the mirror was broken, and now you can choose to stop looking. What if the very question, why do I feel ugly, is the wrong question? Not wrong because it's invalid, not wrong because it lacks depth, wrong because it assumes something inside you is broken. But you are not broken, you are unfinished, you are evolving. The final, most radical truth is this: there is no such thing as beauty in isolation. Beauty is not an object to possess, a shape to emulate, a perfection to capture. It's not a standard, it's a presence. And it cannot be seen until you stop trying to be seen. The philosophers understood this long before filters ever existed. Arthur Schopenhauer, pessimistic as he was, glimpsed it when he wrote about the aesthetic experience as a rare moment of transcendence, when the self disappears and all that's left is being. In that space, beauty isn't something to strive for, it's something to witness. And the paradox? You become most beautiful when you are no longer trying to be. Because beauty is not in symmetry, it's in contradiction. It's in the scars that tell a story, the eyes that have seen pain and stayed open, the laugh that isn't measured but erupts like a storm breaking silence. The world taught you to fear your reflection because it feared your presence. Because a person who knows they are not ugly, who has seen through the illusion, is dangerous. They speak differently, walk differently. They stop asking for permission to exist. They create. And in doing so, they break the system that depends on their doubt. Viktor Frankl, who survived the unthinkable, said that when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But perhaps what we need is not to change ourselves, but to return to the self that existed before the world taught us shame. The child who danced without mirrors, who laughed with her whole body, who didn't know the word ugly and wouldn't have believed it if you said it. That self is still here, waiting. And so, the final answer is not a definition, not a fix, not a trick. It is a release. Release the mirror, release the voices, release the idea that you are a problem to solve. Because you are not ugly, you are the question that makes the mirror crack. And the moment you see that, you'll never see yourself the same way again.